The list was short, but the message was clear. Hai Hongjun, a general, handpicked by Xi Jinping himself, groomed to be the next leader of China's military command, gone. Arrested without warning. No trial, no press conference, just a quiet order, executed before dawn. One by one, the names followed. Loyalists, Xi's inner circle inside the People's Liberation Army, vanishing into detention, silenced. But outside the barracks, the factories were already going dark. The workers sent home early. Orders from the US had dried up. Export contracts dead. Production lines stalled. 145% tariffs. Billions of dollars gone. An economy suffocating without a shot fired. And behind the walls of Zongnanhai, something even more dangerous was beginning to stir. This wasn't just about trade. This was the beginning of a purge. The only question left: who's holding the knife? The factories were the first to fall. In Dongguan, assembly lines that once ran 18 hours a day now sat cold and silent. In Shandong, shipments of LED lighting stacked up in warehouses. Unsold, unpaid, unwanted. In Shenzhen, textile orders from American buyers evaporated overnight. The cause? No mystery. The 145% tariff wall built by the Trump administration didn't just block Chinese goods. It broke the rhythm of China's entire export economy. 1/3 of China's global orders, gone in an instant. By March, some factories were closing by midday. Others stopped hiring. And for many, the math was simple. Shut down production or bleed out slowly. The numbers rolled in like body counts. 80% of export contracts in the textile sector canceled. Medical equipment manufacturers reporting up to 70% losses in overseas orders. Cardboard packaging firms, critical to the shipping pipeline, cutting operations by half. And when the factories shut down, the workers followed. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions, sent home with no work, no pay, no options. But the real shock wasn't on the factory floor. It was in the barracks. Because in China, the military feeds off the economy. The wealth of the export sector doesn't just build bridges and airports. It funds salaries, bonuses, loyalty. When the money stops flowing, so does control. And inside the PLA, those cracks started to show. Mid-level commanders began voicing quiet frustration. Delays in payment, rumors of budget cuts, training exercises reduced, promotions frozen. Behind the polished statements from Beijing, discontent was spreading through the ranks. It didn't take long for those frustrations to find a target. Not Washington, not the tariffs, but the leadership at home. Whispers began to circle around Hai Hongjun, Xi Jinping's most trusted military protege, elevated through the ranks faster than any officer before him, bypassing veterans, breaking the chain of command. Many inside the PLA saw him for what he was, a symbol of Xi's attempt to lock the military in his grip. But the economic collapse changed the equation. For the first time in a decade, there was space to challenge Xi's hold on the armed forces, space to question the promotions, space to demand accountability. When the contracts disappeared and the payrolls thinned, the alliances inside the PLA started to shift. The trigger came fast. In late April, Hai Hongjun was detained. No explanation, no charges released to the public. But inside military circles, the message was received loud and clear. The power balance had shifted. Reports began leaking not from foreign media, but from insiders. Officers quietly confirming to contacts abroad. This is not an anti-corruption sweep. This is something else. Xi's plan to secure his succession inside the military had collapsed. Not because of ideology. Not because of politics. Because the money dried up. The economic chokehold from the outside had created the perfect storm for rebellion on the inside. And one by one, the knives began to come out. Xi's inner circle started to fracture. The generals who had been forced to bow to Hai Hongjun's rapid rise now saw their chance. The tariff war hadn't just hit China's factories. It had ripped through the PLA's command structure. Washington didn't have to lift a finger. The chain reaction was already underway. But how much of this was coincidence? And how much was part of the plan? The next step was even more dangerous, because as the economy suffocated, someone, somewhere, was sending a message. Remove Xi, and we can talk. The world saw tariffs. What it didn't see was the message hidden behind them. Inside the White House, the language was careful. Officially, the 145% tariffs were about leveling the playing field, about stopping unfair trade practices. But off the record, the conversation was very different. In a closed-door session at the Institute of International Finance, a senior Trump advisor put it bluntly, "We're not negotiating with Xi, but we're open to whoever comes next." It wasn't shouted. It wasn't tweeted. It didn't need to be, because in Beijing, the right people were already listening. The timing wasn't accidental. The tariff war hit hardest exactly where Xi's power was most vulnerable, the PLA. For more than a decade, Xi Jinping had worked to remake China's military in his image, pushing out rivals, promoting loyalists, fast-tracking Hai Hongjun to the top. But the promotions came at a price. Veteran commanders bypassed and sidelined. Career officers passed over. And now, as the factories shut down and the money dried up, those same officers were asking, "Why are we following this man?" The US didn't need to organize a coup. They just needed to make one thing clear. Without Xi, the conversation can start. Sources close to the Pentagon confirmed that informal back-channel signals had been quietly passed through trade negotiators, diplomatic envoys, even private sector intermediaries. Nothing on paper, no commitments, but enough to plant the seed. The problem is not China. The problem is Xi. The Chinese leadership knows the history. They remember how Washington handled Saddam, how the West waited for Gorbachev, how pressure doesn't need bullets when it has time and leverage. And this time, the leverage was perfect. The PLA bleeding cash, the economy suffocating, the workers unemployed, the veterans angry. Inside Zongnanhai, the rumor mills spun faster than any propaganda machine could keep up. Who was still loyal? Who was just waiting for the right moment? When Hai Hongjun was arrested, it wasn't because of treason. It wasn't because of corruption. It was because he represented the linchpin of Xi's military control, the chosen successor, the face of the next chapter in Xi's empire. His removal didn't calm the waters. It stirred them, because the purge didn't stop with him. Other officers, other names, quiet disappearances, soft detentions. Investigations launched under the familiar banner of anti-corruption. But everyone inside the system knew the truth. This wasn't cleanup. This was a chess game, and Washington kept playing the long game. They didn't lift the tariffs. They didn't offer deals. They didn't blink. But the message remained, circulating quietly through diplomatic channels, business forums, and think tanks. If Xi falls, the door reopens. One retired CCP official, speaking anonymously to the Financial Times, summed up the mood inside Beijing. The Americans don't need to stage a coup. They just need to wait. The PLA will tear itself apart. And the question was no longer whether the economic pain would break the system. The question was whether the leadership could survive their own anger, their own fear, their own ambition. Because in this kind of siege, the cracks always start from the inside. Before the military cracks, the money dries up. That's how power slips in China. Because in China, business isn't just business. It's the lifeblood of loyalty, the glue that holds the system together, the quiet current that feeds the political machine. When the economy moves, the leadership stays stable. When the contracts roll in, the factories hum, the payrolls flow, the generals are paid. But when the orders vanish, the balance starts to break. It didn't happen all at once. It never does. First, it looked like a slowdown. A few canceled shipments, a couple of factories shortening shifts, a temporary adjustment. But the data told a different story. 80% of textile orders from the US gone. Up to 70% drop in medical equipment exports. Packaging suppliers cutting output by half. Electronics firms reporting 60% capacity reductions. The collapse began quietly. In Guangdong, Blanket Brothers scaled back production to half days. Workers went home early. Machines went cold. In Dongguan, Donghuan Electrical Products halted operations for the entire month. No paychecks, no overtime, no timeline for return. In Shandong, rows of LED lights stacked floor to ceiling in warehouses. Products built for the US market unsellable. Untouched. The shipments stopped. The payments stopped. But the debt didn't. One factory owner admitted in a private conversation with Bloomberg, warehouse rents still due. Bank interest still ticking. Suppliers demanding payment on raw materials already delivered. No way out. Some factories tried to pivot, selling domestically, cutting prices, taking losses just to move product. But the internal market couldn't replace what was lost. A comforter set made for the US sells for $40 overseas. In the domestic market, barely $4. 1/10 the revenue. Not enough to pay the workers. Not enough to keep the lights on. Across the manufacturing belt, Guangdong, Zhejiang, Fujian, Shandong, Jiangsu, the math was the same. And as the orders collapsed, so did the leverage. Because the factories don't just employ the workers. They feed the financial system. Factory owners are local party donors, sponsors of regional programs, the ones writing the checks that keep the gears of loyalty greased. But when the cash stops flowing from the bottom, the pressure moves up the chain. By mid-April, regional banks began reporting spikes in loan defaults. Export credit insurance claims surged. Debt restructuring requests flooded local government offices. The collapse wasn't loud. It didn't make the headlines, but the tremors were real. One garment factory owner in Zhejiang, speaking off record to Reuters, described the change. The banks are nervous. They won't issue new credit. Our suppliers won't give us terms. Everyone's waiting to see who goes under first. The dominoes were starting to fall, and Beijing knew it. But there was no rescue plan. No stimulus package big enough to replace the American market. No policy fix that could stop the bleeding. Instead, the government doubled down on the same old slogans. Boost domestic demand. Expand into belt and road markets. But the numbers kept getting worse. The Canton Fair, China's biggest export showcase, was supposed to bring hope. Instead, it brought empty booths and hollow halls. Western buyers stayed home. Contracts unsigned. Deals left hanging. Inside the factories, layoffs began. First the part-timers, then the temporary contracts, then the full-time staff. At some plants, wages were cut. At others, bonuses canceled. Entire shifts eliminated. And it wasn't just the small players. Even larger manufacturers, the so-called national champions, began quietly approaching lenders for emergency lines of credit, not to expand, just to survive. The pressure wasn't just economic. It was political, because as the factories fell, the flow of money to the party structure slowed with them. Provincial leaders leaned on exporters for stability. Exporters leaned on local officials for credit lines and tax relief. But the chain was snapping. And that's when the fear began to creep up the hierarchy. The question wasn't just, how do we save the economy? It became, how do we hold onto power if the economy collapses? Because when the cash dries up, the loyalty goes with it. The workers walk. The businesses fold. The officials start looking for someone to blame. And at the top of that blame list, the man who promised China could withstand the storm. The man who said the tariffs would never break them. Xi Jinping. The military felt the pain. The factories felt the pain. And as the chain reaction spread, the leadership could feel it too. Because in a system built on control, once the money stops, control is the next thing to go. The factories went silent, but the streets did not. In Shenzhen, the job boards stayed empty. The lines outside recruitment centers stretched longer. And the crowd was younger. Fresh graduates, engineering majors, trade school welders, logistics specialists, all standing in line, resumes in hand, waiting for a chance that wasn't coming. Across the country, 12 million new graduates entered the labor market this year. 12 million young men and women, walking straight into a dead end. Youth unemployment has been called the hidden crisis of China's economy. But in 2025, it's no longer hidden. Leaked university research from Beijing put the number as high as 46.5%. Nearly half of the country's educated youth out of work. The numbers alone tell the story. But on the ground, it feels worse. In Dongguan, a 24-year-old mechanical engineer, recently laid off from a robotics firm, now sells skewers at the night market. "I trained for 5 years. I thought I had a future," he told a Hong Kong journalist. "Now I sell street food. And every night, I see more people like me." This generation was raised on the promise of China's rise. They believed in the system. They believed there would be jobs if they worked hard enough. But as the economy buckled under the weight of the tariff war, the promise broke. The government called it flexible employment, but the people on the streets call it what it is: survival. Rideshare drivers, delivery boys, online streamers hustling for digital gifts, college grads reduced to gig work and tips. And beneath that layer, something even more dangerous was beginning to stir: the veterans. In China, the military isn't just a career, it's a contract, a promise from the state. Serve, and we will take care of you. But the purge inside the PLA, the arrest of Hai Hongjun, the whispers of more to come, shattered that contract. Mid-level officers stuck in stalled careers saw their loyalty bought with promotions, bonuses, and status. But now, promotions frozen, exercises cut, budgets trimmed, and worst of all, silence. The rumor mill inside the barracks moved faster than any official memo. Who was next? Which faction was safe? Who would fall with Hai Hongjun? And who would rise if Xi Jinping lost control? In the mess halls and on the training grounds, frustration built. Not just over the arrests, over the pay delays, the cutbacks, the uncertainty. Veterans who left the service and entered the private sector found the same closed doors as the graduates. No jobs, no openings, no future. The tension wasn't just economic anymore. It was personal. "I fought for this country. Now I can't feed my family." One former PLA sergeant posted anonymously on a military forum before the thread was deleted. In past years, the government had tools to manage dissent. Stimulus packages, new construction projects, public works jobs to keep the economy moving and the people quiet. But with foreign orders gone and domestic demand collapsing, those tools were gone. And as the factories stayed dark, the unemployment lines grew. The young called it lying flat. The veterans called it betrayal. 2 generations, both failed by the system, both looking for someone to blame. Not the Americans, not the tariffs. The blame pointed home, toward the men who promised they could ride out the storm, toward the leadership, toward Xi. The collapse of China's factories didn't just break the economy. It broke the trust between the people and the state. It broke the unwritten agreement between the party and the soldiers. And in a country where control rests on loyalty, from the barracks to the streets, that kind of break is more dangerous than any tariff. Because when the soldiers lose faith, the walls start to crack. And the question now is no longer how bad the unemployment will get. The question is who will still be standing when the collapse is done. It didn't take sanctions or blockades. The pressure that trapped Xi Jinping didn't come from missiles. It came from phone calls, from quiet agreements, from allies stepping back. One by one. The United States didn't need to convince the world to fight China. All they had to do was make the costs of staying close to Xi too high. And country after country made their choice. In India, steel imports from China were hit with 12% tariffs, closing one of Beijing's favorite backdoors to avoid US duties. In South Korea, customs tightened inspections on rebranded Chinese goods, sneaking through ports as made in Korea. In Brazil, Foxconn ramped up iPhone production outside Sao Paulo, pulling manufacturing away from Shenzhen. A quiet shift, but a deliberate one. In Mexico, factories tied to Chinese capital found themselves under sharper scrutiny by US customs and border protection. Supply chain audits intensified. Paperwork doubled. This wasn't open warfare. This was soft lockdown. Decoupling? Officially, no. But de-risking became the new global motto. From Brussels to Tokyo, from Canberra to Ottawa, the message was the same: reduce exposure. Limit dependency. Don't get caught in the crossfire. Europe wasn't screaming about China in the headlines, but the shift was clear. LNG imports from the US increased sharply. Talks about critical minerals and semiconductor supply chains moved away from Beijing. Slow, quiet, methodical. No speeches, no threats, just a steady pulling away. And the worst part for Xi? It wasn't America doing the heavy lifting. It was his own business partners, his own trade relationships, the companies and countries that had once helped power China's rise. Now hedging, now stepping back, now closing the doors one by one. Reports surfaced from Southeast Asia, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, all approached by US trade envoys. All offered the same deal: help tighten the rules of origin, close the loopholes, or risk your own access to Western markets. In Brussels, the conversation was just as direct. No dramatic announcements, but clear signals that products flowing into the EU needed real transparency. No more blind acceptance of goods assembled elsewhere with Chinese parts. Even within BRICS, Beijing's supposed circle of friends, the hedging was obvious. India, Brazil, South Africa, none willing to be the escape hatch for Xi's stranded supply lines. And in Russia, the fallback ally, the trade balance remained thin. Moscow wasn't offering factories or markets. They were buying up leftover Boeing aircraft, not helping Beijing rebuild exports. Every move, every deal, every handshake. One more quiet vote of no confidence in Xi's leadership. The American tariffs had started the squeeze, but the world finished the job. The US didn't have to tell anyone to abandon Xi. The math did it for them. Because when the orders vanish, when the supply chains choke, when the partners turn away, the emperor stands alone. For a leader who built his power on the image of strength, isolation is the sharpest knife. No public revolt, no invasion, just allies walking away. Soft lockdown, chain reaction, no way out. The PLA cracks, the factories close, the young lose faith, and the world quietly moves on. Beijing calls it a trade dispute, but the people inside Zhongnanhai know better. This is a siege, and Xi Jinping is running out of friends. The factories are silent, the workers are waiting, the generals are restless, the allies have walked away. But inside Zhongnanhai, the real battle is only beginning. Xi Jinping's grip was built on fear, loyalty, and momentum. Now the momentum is gone. No invasion, no foreign coup, just a chain reaction collapsing the system from the inside out. The question isn't whether the purge will continue. The question is, who makes the next move? Tell us what you think. Stay with us as the story unfolds.